Several states are pushing back against the CDC's COVID-19 eviction moratorium order, leaving thousands without homes. Last month, the CDC extended its order to June 30th. It postpones rent payments for tenants. The moratorium also prevents landlords from being able to evict tenants for delayed payments. In states like Tennessee, tenants are being evicted at alarming rates. In 2019, the eviction rate was double the national average. That number skyrocketed during the coronavirus pandemic. Recent court decisions are leaving tenants with no protection against evictions and substantial bills for back pay on rent. Experts say cities like Memphis could be a warning for what comes after the moratorium expires. Joining me now for more on this is CBS News MoneyWatch reporter Irina Ivanova. Irina, welcome. Great to see you. How is the moratorium order playing out in the courts? And how is it specifically affecting renters in Memphis when most places around the country are still under an eviction moratorium?
That's right. So there have been many lawsuits filed challenging the CDC's order, and different courts around the country have reached different decisions. There have been at least 2 federal courts that have sided with the CDC, and at least 3 others that have struck it down. Now, the most significant, according to housing advocates, is a decision in the Western District of Tennessee, which includes the city of Memphis. That court found late last month that the CDC basically exceeded its authority when making the order, and that the eviction protection was unenforceable. Now, the federal government is appealing that decision, which means it could be reversed. But in the meantime, the CDC's ruling is not enforced. And housing advocates in Memphis believe it's the largest city in the U.S. without the CDC order. Of course, while the order was in place, eviction cases have been piling up. The order prevented tenants from being removed from their homes physically, but it didn't do anything to stop the filing of evictions. I saw one report that found that the county containing Memphis entered this year with a backlog of 10,000 eviction cases, and they are now coming to a head.
And so, you know, we can't forget that we have to put a human face on all of this, right? It's one thing to talk about the numbers, but to really drill down on the human beings that this is affecting. You spoke to a mother of 3 who is facing eviction. Can you give us more insight into her story in particular and the struggle she faces with her landlord?
That's right. So her case is very complicated, like a lot of eviction cases. I spoke with Angelique Casey, who is 29. She lives with her 3 young boys and her fiance. Her fiance lost his job last year during the pandemic. Angelique had a higher paying job last year in a restaurant, which was also disrupted by the pandemic. She now works at McDonald's making minimum wage. So she doesn't have much money, and she has been in a dispute with her landlord since last summer over repairs. Her landlord actually filed an eviction case against Angelique last year, but because the courts were closed for such a long time and there was this backlog, Angelique had her first hearing just last week. They have only until April 28th to reach an agreement on back rent. And if Angelique loses the case, you know, she basically could be out on the street. Now, if the CDC order were still in place, she could potentially be protected from being physically removed from her home, but that's no longer the case. You know, there's also a timing issue in this as well. Angelique applied for rent assistance, some of the rent assistance that the federal government authorized earlier this year. Angelique says she's been approved. I spoke with her landlord, and the landlord says she hasn't received the money. You know, she says that Angelique owes $3,000 in back rent, and if she gets the money, she'll drop the eviction case. But if she doesn't, she'll proceed. And of course, Angelique now feels like she'll have to move eventually, and she feels like she's in a little bit of a catch-22. She now wants to save money for this eventual move and has even less incentive to pay rent.
So complicated. But of course, you know, Angelique Casey's family is just one of many Black families to face eviction. How did you find that race was playing into the high rates of eviction in Memphis?
Yeah, Tanya, across the country, Black renters are much more likely to face eviction than white renters. And this is the case in Memphis as well. Prior to the pandemic, the neighborhoods with the highest eviction rates were predominantly Black neighborhoods. Of course, eviction filings fell last year during the pandemic, and now that they're increasing fastest in Black neighborhoods. And I wanted to point out something else that housing advocates have said to me repeatedly when researching this story. In addition to race, there's also the factor of parenthood. People with children are actually much more likely to face evictions than people without children. And this has tremendous impact on these kids, potentially affecting their schooling, their health for many, many years down the line.
That is just such a staggeringly heartbreaking thing to hear. Well, Irina Ivanova, thank you so much for sharing your reporting with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Tanya.